Second World War ended officially in 1945, yet the shadows it left behind have never truly lifted. For every victory recorded in official communiqué, there were files stamped top secret, stories buried under black ink, and testimonies suppressed to protect fragile post-war alliances. What we know of the war, the battles, the leaders, the devastation, remains only half the picture. Behind the iron doors of military archives, within sealed vaults of intelligence agencies, and hidden in attics where forbidden diaries were kept, there exists a darker ledger of history. These are not tales of battlefield heroics or celebrated campaigns. They are the suppressed fragments that governments attempted to erase, because their revelation would shake the public's trust and unravel carefully constructed narratives of wartime honor. They involve vanished convoys carrying unregistered cargo, secret facilities converted into laboratories of horror, divisions that appeared without records and dissolved without trace, an entire population swallowed by the mechanisms of totalitarian secrecy. Each story resurfaced only because fragments slipped through, a missing page in a Gestapo file, a Soviet document smuggled to the West, an Allied intelligence note never meant to be unsealed. Together they form a chilling mosaic, one that whispers of events too disturbing for official history to acknowledge. In these lost accounts we glimpse a war not defined by armies and flags, but by shadows, deception, and truths deliberately buried. What you are about to hear are not legends, but classified remnants from the world's darkest conflict, fragments never intended for the public eye. Chapter 1. The Vanished Convoy of Operation Drumbeat, the Atlantic, 1942. The cold waves rolled endlessly under a steel-grey sky, shrouding secrets in their depths. Convoy HX-229, officially logged as a routine merchant crossing from Halifax to Liverpool, departed with dozens of ships carrying what was believed to be ordinary cargo, food, munitions, spare parts for Britain's desperate war effort. Escorts of the Royal Canadian Navy and Royal Navy destroyers were assigned, a familiar protective screen in those years of submarine terror. Yet within weeks, all mention of this convoy ceased in Allied records. Families of sailors received nothing more than vague telegrams, lost at sea, presumed dead. For decades, this disappearance was dismissed as another victim of Admiral Donitz's wolf packs. But fragments hidden in forgotten archives tell a far darker tale. The first clue emerged not from Allied files, but from a decrypted enigma. Intercept discovered among wartime records at Bletchley Park. The German Navy referenced an action involving Einsatzgruppe Haifisch, a wolf pack known to stalk North Atlantic routes. Yet their combat logs for March 1942 omit any engagement with HX-229. No confirmed sinkings, no survivors reported, no debris sighted. Naval historians noted the anomaly but brushed it aside. Only decades later, when Soviet archives were opened briefly in the early 1990s, did references surface to a convoy diverted under unknown control. In documents labeled Material Nyet Deklasirovat, Russian naval officers described cargo of special industrial significance delivered not to Britain, but redirected toward Murmansk. The phrasing echoed Cold War terminology for atomic or chemical research, leading some to suspect the convoy carried materials tied to the embryonic Manhattan Project. The disappearance of HX-229 was doubly peculiar because U-boats normally claimed credit for every successful kill. Admiral Karl Dönitz, meticulous in his obsession with tonnage war, required commanders to log details of every sinking, time, location, ship type, even lifeboats sighted. His post-war interrogations revealed no memory of destroying HX-229, and none of the decorated submarine captains ever boasted of the convoy's annihilation. Yet the tonnage was officially added to U-boat records, a bureaucratic sleight of hand designed to close the file. In intelligence terms, it was a ghost loss, a disappearance acknowledged but never explained. One surviving signal officer from the USS Jacob Jones, who later testified to US naval intelligence in a classified session, recalled receiving faint transmissions on shortwave frequencies in March 1942. They were incomplete distress calls, encrypted in the Allied naval cipher, speaking of course deviation under escort command. Within hours, those frequencies went silent. His testimony was buried in OSS file X7, later transferred to CIA custody under Project Bluebird. The folder, declassified only in fragments, carries the chilling annotation, Restricted Atomic, Do Not Release. What could HX-229 have carried that demanded such silence? In early 1942, The United States had just initiated research into fissionable materials. Uranium shipments were rare, and the sources of heavy water, critical for reactor experiments, were tightly guarded. Some historians suspect the convoy was transporting Norwegian heavy water captured after the sabotage of WWII facilities. Others believe it carried refined uranium from Canada, where deposits in Great Bear Lake were already under military control. If such material were bound for Britain, it would explain both the secrecy and the sudden diversion eastward. But why Murmansk under Soviet control? One theory holds that Roosevelt and Churchill, desperate to maintain Soviet cooperation, covertly transferred atomic material to Stalin under Lend-Lease cover. The deal was never recorded publicly, because to admit it would reveal early Western complicity in Soviet nuclear development. Eyewitness accounts, though rare, add another dimension. A fisherman off the coast of Iceland, in a 1963 interview later sealed by the Ministry of Defense, described seeing merchant ships under escort steaming north into fog, then vanishing without trace. His testimony was dismissed as mistaken identity, but his timeline coincided precisely with HX-229's scheduled passage. More disturbingly, a Soviet trawler log recovered in Murmansk mentioned foreign vessels under redirection, cargo under armed guard, in March 1942. The entry was signed by a naval commissar later executed in Stalin's purges, ensuring the trail ended there. The cover-up extended into post-war years. At Nuremberg, prosecutors meticulously catalogued German naval atrocities, yet HX-229 was never raised. Surviving families, numbering in the hundreds, received no explanation beyond standard lost-at-sea notices. Insurance companies quietly settled claims under sealed proceedings. When pressed in the 1960s by historians, the Admiralty insisted the convoy had been sunk by U-boats. No survivors. The files remain conspicuously incomplete, logbooks missing, tonnage reports altered, and entire pages excised from war diaries. In 1977, during the Freedom of Information Act boom, researchers filed for release of HX-229 documentation. What they received were blacked-out pages, with only references to strategic materials legible. Naval officers privately admitted the convoy's details were classified beyond our level. In intelligence jargon, this meant only a handful of officials at the highest Anglo-American levels ever knew the truth. Some suggest even Churchill himself ordered the silence, fearing scandal if it emerged that Britain had secretly funneled atomic resources to the Soviets. The mystery deepened in 1992 when fragments of Soviet naval reports surfaced in Moscow after the collapse of the USSR. Among the declassified papers was a reference to Cargo Omut, a code name, translating loosely to the abyss. It detailed arrival of Western goods in Arkhangelsk, guarded by NKVD troops. The manifest listed industrial cylinders, metallic ores, laboratory crates, high priority. Within weeks, the files were reclassified and withdrawn. Researchers who copied them reported harassment, suggesting even post-Cold War authorities wanted the trail buried. What remains undeniable is that HX-229 vanished without wreckage, survivors, or conclusive proof of attack. In maritime warfare, even the most catastrophic sinkings left oil slicks, lifeboats, or corpses washed ashore. The North Atlantic, though unforgiving, rarely swallowed fleets whole. The absolute absence of debris suggests deliberate redirection, not destruction. If the convoy reached Soviet ports under secrecy, it would rewrite the early history of the nuclear arms race. It would mean the West not only armed Stalin with conventional weapons, but delivered the seeds of atomic power itself. For the families, the silence endures. Many widows received pensions but never bodies to bury. Their sons and brothers became ghosts, erased from war memorials because their ships were never officially confirmed lost in action. In Halifax, the plaque for HX convoys jumps numerically, skipping over 229 as if it never existed. Such bureaucratic erasure speaks louder than words. Someone wanted the world to forget. The vanished convoy remains a chilling reminder that wars are not only fought with weapons, but with secrets. It demonstrates how governments manipulate history to conceal strategic bargains, even at the cost of erasing hundreds of men from the record. The Atlantic claimed countless ships, but only one vanished so completely into silence. HX-229 did not simply sink beneath the waves. It was buried in the archives, its fate chained to the darkest secrets of the 20th century. Chapter 2. The Silent Camps of Operation Sonnenstein, Saxony, Germany. The hills that rise above the Elbe River conceal ruins that once echoed with the screams of the forgotten. Official wartime records insisted that Sonnenstein, a psychiatric institution near Pirna, was closed in 1940 after the suspension of the T4 euthanasia program. In Allied documentation, it was marked inactive. Yet fragments of Gestapo File 17E, unearthed in the 1970s, paint an altogether different picture. Sonnenstein never ceased to function. Instead, its wards were emptied of patients and repurposed for something darker. Experiments conducted under the codename Action Nabel, meaning Operation Fog. When the T4 program was formally terminated, the physicians and staff responsible for thousands of murders did not vanish. Many were reassigned to concentration camps, where their expertise in mass killing was put to industrial use. But in Sonnenstein, decommissioned on paper, evidence suggests a parallel mission began. The facility was quietly transferred from the Reich Ministry of the Interior to direct SS control, under the oversight of Reichsführer Heinrich Himmler. The site's seclusion made it ideal for covert operations. Soviet NKVD reports, long buried until the opening of archives in the late 1980s, describe Sonnenstein as a testing ground for new atmospheric agents, a chilling euphemism that points toward chemical weapons development. Eyewitnesses were few, but testimonies exist. A Czech partisan captured in 1944 and later interrogated by Red Army intelligence claimed to have seen trainloads of prisoners diverted from Auschwitz to Saxony, escorted by SS Totenkopf units. He described freight cars sealed in winter, windows blackened, marked not with prisoner codes, but with military transport insignia. These accounts were dismissed as rumor at the time. Yet NKVD memoranda from Smolensk describe non-standard prisoner transfers to Pirna region for aerosol trials, a phrase that would resurface decades later in Western intelligence assessments. Allied aerial reconnaissance never struck Sonnenstein. Despite Dresden nearby suffering devastating raids, the omission puzzled historians. Recently declassified British SIS reports suggest the site was deliberately left untouched. In a 1944 cable marked Eyes Only See, British intelligence assessed that target Sonnenstein not recommended for bombardment, civilian psychiatric cloaking. The language implies knowledge of the site's true nature and perhaps tacit agreement to avoid interfering. Some researchers argue that Allied intelligence may have seen value in Germany's chemical warfare research, particularly as both Britain and the United States were experimenting with their own stockpiles of mustard gas and phosgene. What precisely occurred within Sonnenstein's bricked-up chambers remains fragmentary. A handful of post-war interrogations, redacted beyond recognition, mention trials with aerosol dispersal of tabun and possibly early precursors to sarin. These were nerve agents developed under IG Farben's direction, substances so lethal that a few drops could kill within minutes. Germany produced significant quantities by 1944, but hesitated to deploy them widely for fear of retaliation. If Sonnenstein served as a testing facility, it would explain the disappearance of thousands of deportees from Polish and Czech transports. They were never registered at Auschwitz, never logged in Dachau or Treblinka, yet records confirm their deportation. Sonnenstein may have consumed them in silence, their deaths unrecorded in the camp system. The Nuremberg trials brush past this detail. SS physicians from euthanasia programs were questioned, but the full extent of their wartime assignments was concealed. Dr. Paul Nitsche, a key figure in psychiatric killings, was executed in 1948, but much of his testimony regarding Sonnenstein was sealed. Other doctors quietly reintegrated into post-war medicine, some even serving in West German hospitals. Files concerning Sonnenstein's chemical program were transferred to Allied custody, but many remain classified under NATO restrictions to this day. A 1986 NATO directive labeled Biological and Chemical Warfare. Restricted Annex B refers obliquely to Sonnenstein precedent trials, suggesting Western militaries reviewed the data for their own purposes. The silence around Sonnenstein was further enforced during the Cold War. The facility, located in East Germany, was quickly appropriated by the GDR. Soviet engineers bricked over underground tunnels and sealed remaining chambers. Publicly, the regime presented Sonnenstein as a memorial to euthanasia victims, yet access to the deepest levels was forbidden. Researchers who attempted excavation were denied permits or threatened. Only after German reunification in 1990 did limited surveys confirm the existence of subterranean chambers inconsistent with medical use, ventilation shafts, reinforced rooms, and piping systems suitable for gas dispersal. Local villagers carried their own memories, whispered through decades of fear. Elderly residents spoke of trains arriving at night, of smoke drifting above the hills with a sweet chemical odor unlike coal. One farmer recalled SS men warning locals to keep livestock indoors during certain nights, a precaution inconsistent with psychiatric operations. Oral histories collected in the 1990s painted a portrait of dread. People vanished, the air stung, and the hills echoed with strange machinery. Why did Sonnenstein remain untouched by Allied bombers? One hypothesis lies in clandestine exchanges of information between Britain and Germany. As early as 1943, Allied intelligence had penetrated German scientific networks. There are whispers of back-channel assurances that certain sites would be spared in exchange for post-war access to data. If true, it would represent a silent collusion, sacrificing prisoners in exchange for knowledge. Though impossible to prove fully, the absence of bombing on a site tied to SS operations raises questions that remain unanswered. When fragments of Gestapo File 17E surfaced in 1975, they contained chilling annotations. One entry, dated 12 October 1943, reported Test WWII results satisfactory, no survivors. Another, marked 6 February 1944, referenced delivery of Zyklon substitute, air dispersal confirmed. These scraps, heavily censored, indicate not only experimentation but attempts to innovate beyond Zyklon B scholars who reviewed. The files warned that Sonnenstein represented a bridge between euthanasia, killings, and the development of battlefield chemical deployment. For the victims, there are no memorials beyond vague inscriptions. Unlike Auschwitz or Dachau, their names were never logged, their numbers never tattooed. They became unregistered casualties, consumed by an experiment hidden behind medical facades. The silence served multiple masters. The Nazis, who sought secrecy, the Soviets, who controlled the site, and the Allies, who found utility in the results. Each had reason to keep Sonnenstein buried beneath history. Today, the ruins stand as a sanitized memorial, but beneath the polished plaques lies a history deliberately obscured. What happened in those chambers was not madness, but method. Science weaponized against humanity, carried out under the banner of secrecy. Sonnenstein was not merely a psychiatric clinic turned killing ground. It was a prototype laboratory for chemical warfare, a place where thousands perished, not for ideology, but for data points in a ledger of death. The silent camps of Operation Sonnenstein remind us that war's darkest crimes are often those concealed behind walls of bureaucracy and silence. In Saxony's hills, the fog still lingers, both literal and historical, cloaking a story governments never wish to tell. The truth lies sealed in tunnels, bricked by Soviet hands, its victims nameless, its records shredded, yet its shadow endures. Chapter 3. The Ghost Division in the Ardennes. December 1944. The Ardennes Forest, Belgium. Snow fell heavily over the narrow roads and stone villages, muffling sound and cloaking movements in shadow. Allied intelligence believed the Wehrmacht too exhausted to mount a large offensive. Yet on the 16th of December, the German army launched Unternehmen Wacht am Rhein, Operation Watch on the Rhine, an immense surprise attack that would become the Battle of the Bulge. Amid the chaos, American patrols and British reconnaissance reported engagements with a mysterious armoured formation identified as the 116th Panzer Division. Its appearance seemed routine at first. Germany had many armoured divisions, but records soon revealed something impossible. The 116th was pinned down near Aachen at the time, far from the Ardennes battlefield. What Allied soldiers faced instead was a phantom force, a ghost division that advanced through fog, struck with precision, and then dissolved without leaving wreckage. US after-action reports filed by the 99th Infantry Division noted armoured columns without markings, advancing in silence, disappearing into tree lines with unnatural speed. Survivors described black crosses painted crudely on tanks, lacking the numerical insignia standard on Wehrmacht vehicles. Villagers recalled hearing engines in the night, followed by explosions and sudden silence. No captured prisoners were ever produced, no destroyed tanks photographed. Yet casualty lists confirmed the cost. Platoons annihilated, convoys ambushed, bridges destroyed. These reports were logged into Schaff's war diary, but later redacted. The official record now lists only enemy activity, unknown unit. British SIS assessments raised alarms in January 1945. A cable marked Most Secret, Ref Wotan suggested the existence of a clandestine SS detachment operating outside normal Wehrmacht command. Operation Wotan, an experimental psychological warfare program, had been rumored within German ranks since 1943. Its objective: create confusion by deploying elite forces disguised as regular divisions. Their identities erased, their missions compartmentalized. If such a unit existed, it would explain the Phantom Panzers. But why no trace after the battle ended? One hypothesis centers on the Waffen-SS Brigade Schill, a unit recorded as missing during late 1944. Some researchers argue it was absorbed into a shadow formation intended for the Ardennes offensive. Their equipment, possibly refitted Panther and Tiger tanks, stripped of identifying numbers, could have been used to simulate the presence of an entire division. The fog that blanketed the Ardennes provided the perfect cover, amplifying the illusion. But the disappearance of the unit afterward remains unexplained. No captured documents list its order of battle. No veterans ever admitted service in such a division. Even post-war interrogations of German generals contain nothing but denial. More chilling are the erased photographs. US aerial reconnaissance. Missions flown on 20 and 21st December were tasked with documenting German troop movements. Yet the reels developed at RAF Medmenham show frames excised from the record. Page numbers jump, captions blur. Analysts later testified that certain photographs of unidentified armored groupings were removed before reports reached Eisenhower's headquarters. The missing material was filed under Restricted Special Branch. Some speculate the images revealed something Allied command could not explain or did not want publicized. American infantrymen who survived encounters with the ghost. Division left haunting testimonies. Private Robert Calhoun of the 106th Division wrote in his diary, "We fired at tanks, but when the fog lifted, they were gone. Not destroyed, not retreating, gone. Villagers swore nothing had passed. Our shells had struck emptiness." His diary was confiscated upon return to the United States, released only after his death in 1979. Other soldiers described hearing German orders shouted in accents that seemed rehearsed, stripped of regional dialects. It was as if the enemy had been trained to erase identity, to become shadows in the fog. Civilian accounts corroborate the soldiers' fears. Residents of Houffalize spoke of columns of armor passing silently, no headlights, only black silhouettes in snow. A priest in Bastogne swore he heard tanks grinding past his church on Christmas Eve, but when he ventured out at dawn, the roads bore no tracks. These stories were dismissed as hysteria born of battle stress, yet their consistency cannot be ignored. Why would such a unit exist? Historians examining captured SS records point to Himmler's obsession with occultism and psychological operations. But more plausibly, the Ghost Division represented a desperate attempt at deception, an experiment in battlefield disorientation. By creating the illusion of a larger force, the Germans sought to paralyze Allied counterattacks. Still, this explanation does not account for the missing soldiers, the vanished equipment, or the erased intelligence files. A deception unit leaves wreckage when destroyed. This one left nothing. In the years after the war, whispers of the Ghost Division persisted in veteran circles. US Army intelligence officers, now retired, admitted to encountering redacted memoranda titled Phantom Panzers, Ardennes Sector. One officer recalled a 1947 meeting at Fort Meade, where the division was discussed in relation to Soviet Maskirovka tactics. The implication was unsettling. The West may have studied the Ghost Division not as an enemy anomaly, but as a prototype for future deception warfare. If so, the erasure of records served a strategic purpose, concealing how much was learned and reused in the Cold War. By the 1950s, official histories of the Battle of the Bulge had scrubbed mention of the Phantom Force. The 116th Panzer was recorded only in Aachen. The surviving testimonies of American soldiers were dismissed as confusion, while civilian reports were ignored. The term Ghost Division became relegated to rumor, stripped of credibility. Yet classified SHAF logs still contain unexplained casualty spikes on nights when the Phantom Panzers were most active. Men died fighting an enemy who, officially, did not exist. The Ardennes Ghost Division remains a cold case within military history. Was it a misidentified unit, a deliberate deception, or something stranger still, a formation created to vanish? Its presence in the fog reflects the war's darker reality. Battles are not fought only with bullets, but with shadows and illusions. The men who fought against these phantom tanks swore they were real. The governments who reviewed the evidence swore they were not. Between those contradictions lies the truth. Erased, redacted, buried in archives stamped, never to be released. In the frozen forests of the Ardennes, fog rolls in even today. The villages rebuilt, the roads cleared, yet the land still carries its ghosts. The Ghost Division left no graves, no monuments, no survivors. Only silence remains, punctuated by testimonies scribbled in diaries and fragments of erased reconnaissance photographs. The battlefields remember, even if history books do not. And somewhere in the labyrinth of sealed archives lies the final page, the one marked Wotan, the one that governments still refuse to reveal. Chapter 4: Stalin's Disappearing Prisoners of Smolensk. Smolensk, 1941. When German Army Group Center advanced deep into Soviet territory, they overran not only cities, but also the machinery of Stalin's secret police. Among the captured buildings was the NKVD headquarters in Smolensk, a complex of stone offices and barracks filled with files, ledgers, and abandoned uniforms. Wehrmacht intelligence officers expected to find routine documents, lists of informants, prisoner registers, orders from Moscow. Instead, they discovered absence. Entire prison wings stood empty, bunks stripped, doors left ajar. Registers that should have contained thousands of names were burned, leaving only fragments of ash. A few scraps bore chilling annotations: Operacja Chertov Most, Operation Devil's Bridge. The Germans had arrived too late to intercept what happened next. The prisoners had vanished. Captured German reports, filed under Abwehr Section 2C, described their confusion. One memorandum noted, absence of bodies, absence of resistance, cells vacated within hours. Another, dated August 1941, speculated that NKVD detachments had executed the detainees in retreat, but reconnaissance patrols found no mass graves in the forests. Later Soviet archives, partially opened in the 1990s, confirmed that the prisoners were not executed in Smolensk. Instead, sealed train convoys departed east, carrying thousands under NKVD guard toward destinations never listed in official Gulag records. Where they went remains one of the least understood enigmas of the war. The number of missing was staggering. By conservative estimates, 10,000 prisoners were held in Smolensk and surrounding camps in 1941. They included political dissidents, Polish officers, captured Finns, and even Soviet citizens accused of counter-revolutionary behavior. The Germans expected to inherit these captives, as they had in other regions. Yet all evidence suggested the NKVD orchestrated a rapid evacuation just days before the city fell. Operation Devil's Bridge was never acknowledged by Moscow. Files connected to it were placed in Osobaya Papka, the special folder reserved for state secrets beyond classification. Only a handful of Soviet officials ever had access. Western intelligence began to take interest after the war. In 1952, declassified CIA memoranda described large-scale NKVD transfers from Smolensk to Urals, summer 1941. Informants whispered of underground facilities near Sverdlovsk, where forced labor was used not for mining or logging, but for special weapons projects. The reports noted the involvement of Lavrenti Beria, Stalin's feared security chief. Beria had been tasked with overseeing both the atomic program and biological research. If prisoners were diverted to his custody, they may have become unwilling participants in experiments too dangerous to entrust to Soviet scientists. Polish investigators stumbled across fragments of this story while researching the Katyn massacres. In their quest to account for missing officers, they uncovered references to prisoner convoys that vanished before reaching execution sites. Yet whenever Polish commissions raised questions about Smolensk, Soviet authorities silenced them, insisting all deaths were explained by Katyn. Warsaw Pact politics ensured compliance. To press further would have risked destabilizing the fragile alliance with Moscow. The files were sealed, the questions buried. Eyewitness accounts are rare, but a few survived. A Soviet railway worker, interviewed secretly in the 1960s, recalled sealed trains departing Smolensk station in July 1941. Guards ordered civilian crews away, but he glimpsed prisoners through cracks in the wooden cars. Men in tattered uniforms, some speaking Polish. The trains moved east under heavy escort. He claimed the cars bore special markings. a red star over a black bar, a symbol he had never seen before or since. His testimony was dismissed as unreliable, yet the detail of the markings recurs in 2 other accounts collected decades later. The fate of the prisoners became entangled with rumors of biological warfare. Soviet defectors in the early Cold War spoke of facilities in the Urals where anthrax, plague, and other pathogens were cultivated. Prisoners, they said, were used in exposure trials, monitored until death, their remains incinerated to erase evidence. Western intelligence assessed these claims with caution, but Operation Devil's Bridge provides a possible origin. Thousands vanished without records, without graves, into a system designed to consume them in silence. If they were used in such experiments, their erasure was complete. German officers who captured Smolensk left their own cryptic notes. One report, later recovered from Bundesarchiv, stated, "NKVD departed with exceptional haste, destroying archives selectively. Key files missing, not random." Another mentioned that interrogation of captured NKVD guards yielded only rehearsed answers, as if they themselves did not know the destination. The secrecy was absolute, compartmentalized even within Stalin's police. This level of control suggests an operation of highest priority, linked directly to the Kremlin. After the war, the Smolensk files became bargaining chips in intelligence exchanges. The United States recovered microfilmed copies of certain NKVD records from German custody. These copies, reviewed by the CIA in 1948, contained fragments referencing material osobai, special material, transported during Operation Devil's Bridge. The language matched Soviet euphemisms for strategic research assets. Declassification requests in the 1970s revealed only blacked-out lines and red stamps. Not for release, national security. The silence was deafening. In 1992, Russian archivists briefly opened the Osobaya papka related to Smolensk. Journalists reported glimpses of transport manifests, coded destinations in the Urals, and references to Beria's direct oversight. Within days, the documents were reclassified. Those who viewed them claimed the destinations matched sites later known as closed cities, Sverdlovsk 19, Chelyabinsk 40, names associated with nuclear and biological projects. If true, the Smolensk prisoners may have been the first forced laborers fed into the Soviet atomic machine, long before the world knew such projects existed. The tragedy of Stalin's disappearing prisoners lies not only in their deaths, but in their erasure. Families received no notices, no graves, only silence. Their names do not appear in Gulag records or execution lists. They are ghosts within a system that thrived on invisibility. For decades, their fate was conflated with Katyn, a convenient cover that allowed Soviet officials to deny responsibility, yet the numbers never matched. Katyn explained thousands, but not all. The remainder were swallowed by Operation Devil's Bridge. Why does this matter today? Because it reveals the machinery of totalitarian secrecy. Stalin's regime not only killed, it perfected disappearance as a weapon, removing not just bodies, but memory. The vanished prisoners of Smolensk exemplify this horror. They were transported east under orders no one dared question, consumed by projects too secret to acknowledge. Their absence is a wound in history, an empty ledger line in both German and Soviet records, and every attempt to uncover the truth has been met with silence, redaction, or intimidation. The forests around Smolensk still hold their secrets. Villagers whisper of tunnels under the old NKVD compound, sealed with concrete. Some claim to hear echoes on still nights, as if trains once rumbled beneath the earth. Whether fact or folklore, the image endures. Prisoners led into shadows, never to return. Operation Devil's Bridge remains one of the war's darkest enigmas, a reminder that behind the visible battles lay hidden machinery of terror. In Stalin's hands, disappearance itself became a weapon of war. The war has ended, the documents sealed, the witnesses silenced, yet the questions linger like shadows across Europe's scarred landscape. The vanished convoy that sailed into fog without a trace, the camps where chemical death was perfected under the mask of medicine, the armored division that struck from nowhere and dissolved into mist, and the prisoners spirited east by Stalin's secret police, all remain enigmas buried beneath layers of censorship and denial. Governments have written their official histories, polished for public consumption, but these fragments, these forbidden files, tell us another story, that the Second World War was not only fought with tanks and rifles, but with secrecy, deception, and ruthless experiments on human lives erased from the record. Each case reveals a pattern of silence enforced at the highest levels, not only during the war, but across the Cold War decades, when revelations threatened alliances and power balances. Today, we are left with partial glimpses, redacted reports, missing photographs, testimonies smothered under bureaucracy. The unresolved nature of these mysteries is what makes them endure. Were Allied leaders complicit in the transfer of atomic secrets to Stalin? Did Western governments deliberately shield SS experiments to exploit their findings? Did an entire battalion of men become a phantom to test psychological warfare? Where did the vanished trains from Smolensk deliver their human cargo, and what experiments consumed them in secrecy? These are questions left unanswered, questions governments never intended the public to ask. And as long as those files remain buried, history itself remains incomplete, haunted by the ghosts of a war we thought we understood.